Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar. For those of you who aren't able to attend, we are recording this webinar, and assuming I don't screw it up royally, we will publish it and provide it as a link. So those of you who are in attendance, if you need to leave or answer customer questions or go sell some guns, we're definitely going to try to make sure this will be available for all of you. At the same time, I should mention, unlike my long, drawn-out prior webinars, we're going to try to keep this short and sweet and to the point. So my goal is about 30 to 40 minutes. Joel and Aaron can try to keep me to that. So we're excited to announce coreGUARD. We sent out an email, I think, a week or two ago announcing it. And this webinar, we're just going to delve into the detail of what coreGUARD is and how it can enhance your website. The main purpose of coreGUARD is, of course, fraud protection. Let's just talk a little about fraud. And obviously, those of you who are attending this webinar probably run an e-commerce website. Most of you, I'm sure, have had quite a few instances of fraud. We've seen that across various different industries. One of our primary industries being the shooting sports industry, we have seen a ton of fraud, especially when it comes to certain products. So let's just talk a little about 2019. We've got some numbers for accurate numbers for 2019. There were over 650,000 cases of identity theft in 2019. Ages between 30 and 39 reported the most cases of identity theft. Georgia, Nevada, California were the top 3 states for identity theft. Over 270,000 reports of credit card fraud was the most common type of identity theft last year, and more than doubled from 2017 to 2019. So fraud is not going away. In fact, it's becoming more sophisticated and harder to prevent. Almost 165 million records containing personal data, which included everything from identity, addresses, email addresses, passwords, credit card numbers. I mean, 165 million records, that's literally half the population of the United States. That was the breaches in 2019. We're not at the end of 2020, so I don't have accurate numbers. But I can assure you, unfortunately, it's getting worse and not better. Just one example of Capital One, which, again, is a massive institution, a massive bank. They have plenty of security in place, but they had the biggest data breach in 2019, and over 100 million consumers had their personal data exposed. And again, it's not just a matter of exposing credit card information. It's also personal information, which helps fraudsters come up with all kinds of schemes of trying to utilize credit cards, get product, order product, and basically steal and try to get away with criminal acts. So unauthorized access is certainly on the rise. It's one of the leading causes of exposure in terms of personal information that's being exposed. At the end of July, FTC had fielded almost 150,000 COVID-19 and stimulus-related fraud reports, which is, again, just a massive number. Researchers for 2021, based on what they've seen so far this year, they're estimating over $200 billion in credit card fraud and chargebacks and over $16 billion in online advertising fraud that are being predicted for 2021. They're expecting those numbers to go up even further. Obviously, people are at home. People are ordering more things digitally. That's one of the effects of this absolutely insane year, has been the much more rapid adoption of online shopping and the increase that we've seen in terms of just the amount. It's not just any given industry. The overall digital ordering has grown tremendously. Again, every time that you have to deal with a fraudulent transaction, there's obviously costs involved. There's chargeback costs. There's time costs that you're spending time. And we field a lot of questions. And we actually, here at coreGUARD, we're constantly being asked by our retailers retailers, which some of our retailers, they're newer to the online world. Some of our retailers are more sophisticated, but no matter what, everyone always asks us, how can we reduce fraud? What are things that we can do? And certainly we put in some measures within the software a long time ago, and we have certain recommendations. So within our coreForce platform, which is now what it's known as. So some of you may know it as CoreShop, CoreWare. I keep mentioning coreForce because we are going through a branding exercise and we're trying to do it softly so everyone gets used to it. Within coreForce, you do have certain features, and I can certainly point them out. I think most everyone has them turned on. So obvious things that you want to do is, basically make sure the billing address matches the shipping address. That's a setting that you can set within our software. If you are only selling within the United States, you definitely want to turn off the ability to order from other countries. Now, again, a lot of these measures won't make a darn of difference, is what we discovered. Turning on CAPTCHA, which is those annoying letters that, for a long time, we didn't want to add that capability because it annoys shoppers, right? That they have to put in, the confirmation, and half the time you can't read it. Again, our CAPTCHA, I think, is pretty good and pretty easy to read. But regardless, it's another annoyance for that shopper. But at the same time, it's a way to make sure that there's not bots that are being used. So we introduced several options in terms of trying to strengthen that. Not allowing guest checkout is another important one. So you force a customer to create an account. It's really no extra work from the customer standpoint. They just need to select a password. But again, it's another way to prevent fraud. It's in your control. If you don't like having that, you don't have to. But a lot of fraudsters, tend to just stick to guest accounts, and you can actually turn those guest accounts off so that you can't check out as a guest account. Now, with all of that said, there's some negatives, right? If I'm buying a gift for someone that, doesn't live in my household, I have to receive the shipment and then ship it out to them. And that obviously is a negative, and certainly a negative in certain shoppers' minds. So there's always that give and take. What we wanted to do is take it one step further to try to help you identify fraudulent transactions, and basically what we call not become yet another statistic. So how can we accurately help you prevent e-commerce fraud? We cannot prevent e-commerce fraud completely. It's anyone that would claim that would be lying, because again, fraudsters become smarter. They use newer techniques, and we'll talk about some of the things that they've been doing. But what coreGUARD will allow you to do is it will allow you to detect fraudulent transactions and high-risk users by tapping into a network of known abusers. So we're actually looking through a database, basically, that has been built over years and is constantly being updated. So we're searching for not just IP addresses that have been reported as fraud. We're searching also for patterns of behavior. We're searching for various ways to detect if someone is trying to hide behind their real identity. Each time coreGUARD is enabled, it's tapping into this network with hundreds of millions of transactions. So there's a lot of companies out there that offer fraud protection, and they even guarantee that fraud protection. They provide you essentially an insurance plan. They charge typically 0.5% to sometimes even over 1% of each transaction. And we all know in the e-commerce world, obviously, there's not much room, in terms of if you're trying to compete. A lot of times your margins, you're not left with, you're not sitting there with huge margins that you can, just play with and give up a percentage of your transaction. But what those services are using behind the scenes is basically these same databases that we're tapping into. So they're using the same databases. They're charging a whole lot more because they're guaranteeing that transaction and saying, look, we'll cover your chargeback if it's fraudulent. So of course, higher risk for them, higher price for you. What we're doing is we're just enabling you to make a more informed decision. And we're doing whatever we can to detect and identify that fraudulent transaction, and therefore giving you the same tools that these more expensive services provide you. It's really a theme of CoreGUARD, what I keep referring to as an onion, right? There's so many onions out there when it comes to these, all kinds of solutions, credit cards, right? We'll have another webinar on CoreClear, which is our merchant services, but the credit card world is just a layer. It's an onion, with a bunch of layers. And what we're trying to do, and as we get smarter and as we learn things, both from the industry and from customers, we're trying to eliminate those onion layers. So in this case, we're eliminating some of those onion layers and just providing you a direct access to this data that we've been able to tap into. And this data is intelligent data. So it's not just static data. It's constantly improving. It's constantly learning, based on previous transactions, based on not just your website, but other websites that are subscribed to the service. We're looking at various different things in terms of, we're looking at obviously the IP address, which is the address that customer is coming from. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. We're looking at the email, even the email address, to see if that email address has a reputation to it. Has that email been used for fraudulent transactions before? But even more importantly, is that email address, is there a history on it? Or potentially, is it a new email address that was created by that fraudster? So the key is for us is what we're trying to do is minimize your lost revenue and minimize those chargeback costs. And that's what coreGUARD is all about. It's to help you better identify those, and I'll make sure I'll probably repeat this multiple times. It's the potential fraudulent transactions. It is not a science. It is not 100% accurate. And in fact, there are times when we might think something is fraudulent, but it's not really fraudulent, and vice versa. But again, the more we use these tools, the smarter not only we get when we look at a transaction, but also the system gets smarter. So obviously it's really, costly and frustrating when a chargeback fee is applied. And not only that, you risk, your reputation with a credit card company. We've got customers that, unfortunately, because of too many chargebacks, the merchant services holds back a lot of funds. That's working capital that you could be using in your bank account. So imagine, we've had customers literally that the merchant services, because they saw too many chargebacks, they held back literally 5 figures, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 that they held back of your money. So just imagine being able to hopefully prevent that from happening. And the idea is once we identify an order that's a high-risk transaction, you can do several things with that. You can research it. You don't have to take our advice, right? You don't have to say, wow, coreGUARD is rating this as 100% fraudulent. Is it really? It doesn't look like it to me. Let me call the customer, right? Let me ask them for a copy of their driver's license, right? Let me talk to them. We had an incident recently where our customer called their customer, and they were instantly hung up on. What does that tell you? That pretty much tells you it was a fraudulent transaction, and they called them because it was a high score. It was a high probability that transaction was fraudulent. So the idea is that we look at every order. We look at what's in that order, where it's coming from, where did that person enter that order from, what's the billing address, what does the billing address correlate to the phone number? Can we find any evidence of correlating those two? Can we find any evidence of a phone number correlating to the email address, right? These are all tell-all signs on whether a transaction is fraudulent. There's all the obvious checks, right? Is this person, is this credit card fraudulent? But that's the obvious one, right? That's the obvious one. So of course we detect stolen credit cards and the billing details. But coreGUARD, the idea is it basically works behind the scenes, right? It's basically looking at that order when you pull up the order in the transaction. It also looks at the order if you have automated order controls set up. So for those of you who are existing customers of ours, you may or may not know that you can have orders placed and completed automatically. So many of you are using distributor feeds, which means that you're drop shipping. And if you're drop shipping, and again, for those of you specifically in a high demand, low supply industry, such as currently the shooting sports, you're trying to place those orders with your distributors as quickly as possible. So you may be leveraging our automated ordering controls. Our automated ordering controls allow you, with a massive degree of granularity, allows you to automatically place orders with the third party, in this case with distributors or directly with manufacturers. But obviously, coreGUARD has to come into play with those orders. If it's an order that you're not reviewing and that's being processed automatically for you, we want to make sure that the risk of that transaction being fraudulent is tremendously reduced. So we take extra care on the automated orders, and we make sure that we won't release an order that is above a score. I think our default is 45, meaning we're pretty confident that that order is not fraudulent, and you can control that, right? We have system settings, and I'll talk a little about the system settings that are available for coreGUARD. They're not many, but you do have control over how do you want to tweak coreGUARD, right? How stringent do you want coreGUARD to be? Do you want it to be pretty lenient, or do you want it to be stringent? Maybe you've used it for a while and it seems a little too stringent, so you want to loosen up the grip a little, and you've got control over that. So coreGUARD is fully baked in. It's fully integrated into the rest of the CoreForce solution. So the idea is that we're looking at, various pieces of information. We're looking at the transaction itself, the nature of the transaction. We're looking at previous history. We're looking at the credit card number. We're looking at the email address. We're looking at the email reputation. We're trying to validate the phone number. We're looking at all of those pieces of information to help you make that decision. We don't make the decision for you, right? We don't stop an order. Now, we do have the ability to stop what we think is a nefarious user from even placing an order, right? And any of you, I don't know if anyone's on here that has already signed up to coreGUARD, and if you did, we thank you. And you may have experienced some false positives there where a user maybe got blocked when they weren't supposed to, because we had it set to where, if we thought that, 100% this is a fraudulent person, we wouldn't even let them complete the transaction. But we've tweaked that quite a bit based on input. So your input is, obviously very important for us to make sure we keep perfecting this engine. So, we've built this engine around this data that's available to us, and we're making decisions based on that data. And we're trying to make intelligent decisions without causing you any stoppage of business. But at the same time, we don't want to cause any fraudulent transactions to slip through the cracks. So it's that fine balance, right? We're walking that tightrope and trying to make sure we stay centered and we don't fall off in either direction. So this sounds really fancy. We keep hearing the word machine learning and AI and, adaptive scoring. What does all of this mean from a business owner standpoint? There's a lot of buzzwords in technology. And quite frankly, there's a lot of buzzwords that are misused. But in this case, the coreGUARD engine is basically learning. It's literally, and that's what machine learning is. What is machine learning? Machine learning is computers that are fed a ton of data and then detect patterns. It's not magic. Artificial intelligence is not magic. It's advanced programming and and massive data. Adaptive scoring just means that the scores, as you keep using coreGUARD and as our overall customer base uses it, that scoring becomes smarter and smarter, and it becomes more accurate, and there's less false positives and less positive falses. So that's what machine learning is about. So coreGUARD basically is just constantly looking at that data and looking at patterns, looking at orders that are coming through and helping identify if it's a legitimate order or if it's not, and letting you know that an action needs to be taken on that order. So coreGUARD is again, it's new, but it's using data that's been around and is constantly being updated for literally many years. It's the same data engine that's, as I mentioned before, that literally even credit card companies are tapping into to try to determine, I'm sure all of you have received a call or a text from your credit card company saying, will you please acknowledge this transaction? Something seems amiss. Something doesn't seem right, and how are they doing that? They're just doing it by looking at that data. They suddenly see that you live in Texas, but an order came through from your credit card and that order was in, I don't know, maybe you were visiting Florida. All of that's, pretty good. And we're going to look at, a couple of these fraud reports that we provide you. And you'll see that currently, we're really leveraging the IP address, and we study that IP address, and we look at it to see if there's any history, any pattern. Let me first explain, before I explain what device fingerprinting is, let me explain what the IP address is. And again, some of you may already know, some of you may not be technical, some of you may have heard what an IP address is, but you're not really sure what it represents or how it works. So basically, just to break it into what I would call layman terms, an IP address is just basically it's a digital address, right? Your physical address is your street address. Your IP address is your digital internet unique address. It's basically how I can identify a computer on the internet. But here's the catch. Here's the gotcha, right? So, if I see that there was a fraudulent transaction from IP address, and we'll just keep it simple, 1234, 1.2.3.4, right? And I've seen that in the past, I can say, you know what, Ezra, this is a bad IP address. So I never want to, I will always identify an order as fraudulent if it comes from IP address 1234. But here's the problem with that. It's a good indicator, but it doesn't work all the time. And not only that, it quite often can identify what we call a good actor, meaning a valid customer. A non-fraudulent transaction can be identified wrongly as a bad transaction. And the reason that can happen is because IP addresses are actually not unique. Now, you might be saying, Ezra, you just contradicted yourself. You first said they are unique, and now you're saying they're not unique. So here's the key. At the end of the day, it's the device that's connected to the internet that generates that IP address. So for example, if you're in a household and you're all sharing the internet connection, the internet sees your connection as a single IP address. If you're sitting on a network of computers, if you're, for example, if you have cable internet, it may identify a whole group of houses as one IP address. But it gets even better because IP addresses can be spoofed. So what that means is I basically can fake my IP address. So IP addresses are neat because I can look at an IP address. Well, I can't personally, but you can look up an IP address and you can identify what country that IP address is coming from. Here's the but. There's ability pretty easily to spoof an IP address, meaning I can fake an IP address. So an IP address, even though it's very important and it does help identify potential fraud, it's far from perfect. So one of the things that's coming near term, and we're hoping to have this ready either literally end of the year or beginning of next year, is the next level of fraud detection, which will go even further than just looking at the IP address, looking at an email address, because again, all of that fraudsters, have the ability to fake, to steal, to, use legitimate means to obtain data that will look on the surface as a perfectly valid order. So device fingerprinting is even a next level that we're introducing, and it will allow coreGUARD to detect even more advanced fraudsters. So it will scan over 300 data points to accurately identify any irregularities in a user's online fingerprint that would indicate the user is intentionally manipulating their online signature, such as automated behavior, device spoofing, and other strong signals that the user is likely to engage in high-risk behavior. So it's basically a piece of JavaScript code that goes on your page that will then essentially, and not in a nefarious way, but it will look at that person's device, not just their IP address. And we'll try to find even more ways to identify fraud is happening. So it will detect things that aren't as easy to detect. So even if a user changes their IP address, even if they use a proxy, and again, a proxy is just kind of it's what I would call a hop and a skip to get to a website. So normally when you're going to a website, you go directly to that website. A proxy is basically a device that's sitting in the middle that you're going to go to the proxy, and the proxy goes to the website, thus protecting your identity. Even without device fingerprinting, we can tell if someone's using a proxy. Now, what's interesting is more and more people are using proxies, not for bad reasons, not because they're trying to commit fraud, but because they're trying to remain anonymous on the web. And why do people try to stay anonymous on the web? Because we're all getting sick and tired of being spied on by big corporate America. We're tired of seeing our data shared with various different marketing. And of course, some of you use these techniques, so I shouldn't be overly critical. But again, the nature of consumers is they're becoming more sensitive to their data being shared. So there are legitimate reasons that users, and especially in certain industries, users are a little more paranoid, and they will use proxies, and they are valid users. They're not trying to commit fraud. They're just trying to make sure that they're not spied on. So the beauty of this device fingerprinting is it will help us not just find more sophisticated fraudsters, but also it will help us identify legitimate users that may be using techniques that are mistakenly leading us to believe on the surface that they're fraudsters. That's what the device the device fingerprinting will allow us to do. And as we get more sophisticated, and the fraudsters are becoming more sophisticated, but we'll be able to detect, a lot of these more sophisticated attacks, which again, at the end of the day, will help you feel very comfortable that an order that's not identified as fraud is safe to fulfill. Some of the estimates is being able to prevent fake accounts with real-time device fingerprinting will improve your audience quality by up to 15 to 20%. Because right now, they're getting so sophisticated. It's absolutely insane. And on the surface, when we've looked at some of the orders that we know were fraudulent because our customers let us know, Ezra, these were definitely fraudulent. We got chargebacks. There is no way for looking at things visually that anyone could ever tell that those orders were fraudulent. We had fraudsters that were literally waiting for, and I think there's a term for it. I don't know if anyone on my team remembers the term, but it's something like a porch thief. But there's the sophisticated porch thieves that literally will use a legitimate address, legitimate card, billing matches shipping, and they simply just wait for the box to show up. And when you're talking about an expensive item, obviously it's worth it for them to take the risk. The other feature that's coming very soon is also fraud confirmation, and that will help us as a community. So when we basically, coreGUARD will help you identify and help you research more to determine if an order is a fraud. But what happens after that? So what happens after that, typically you're going to mark an order as fraudulent and you're not going to ship it. And you may report this to the credit card company. But at the end of the day, how does that help? Long term, we want to try to build this as a community solution. So we're going to give you a way to report this back to us by simply clicking a button and saying, yes, this was in fact fraud. And when you confirm that with us, guess what? This is where machine learning comes into play. It's not magic. The machine just says, yep, that was a fraud transaction. Let me look at the patterns of the order. Let me look at all the different things. Let me look at the score that I originally assigned to that order. And now not only can I learn more, but I can also share this information with other users. So everyone basically becomes a participant in helping these tools improve and grow and become smarter and better with time. So now I'm going to share my screen. And just really briefly, I'm going to walk you through coreGUARD and how it works within our system. This is actually a real fraudulent transaction. Basically, when you have coreGUARD enabled, we literally show you the fraud score right here. Again, I would never use that as the only measure to determine if this was a fraudulent transaction. Now, it's a sure tell sign if it's 100, but there are cases that we actually saw that looked legit. There was an order, and it was someone used their business address, which was a that raises a flag. It increases that score. And there was some other information, the URL matched their name because it was their business. But basically, the system looked at it and said, wow, this looks like fraud. And Aaron and I actually were on the phone, and I'm like, Aaron, I don't think this one's a fraud. I would follow up, call the customer. In this case, we don't even have a billing and shipping address match. And let me pull up the actual report and just walk you through this particular report. So you'll notice immediately that we have a valid billing and shipping address, right? And our user email actually passed what we call a reputation check, right? And that again, it's not a science, but if we see something that it looks like a temporary email or it was just created, that will get flagged. Risky phone number, again, it's a flag. It says that phone number has been used before in suspicious transactions or has no history to it, or is known as a sequence of bot phone numbers that have been used before, right? So the risk factor in this particular transaction is 100 because and I'll explain what the risk score is actually, quite frankly, it's probably more important than the IP address score, right? The risk score takes into account what the IP address score is, but also takes into account the reputation of this transaction. And if you notice, you'll see that basically there's no match when it comes to trying to match the phone with the email address, trying to match the phone to the physical address, trying to match the email to the person's name. So all of these checks come into play to say, wait a minute, I'm not finding any matches here. That's kind of a red flag. But it actually gets kind of better than that because in this case, now again, if I was looking at the order, I may never have necessarily identified this as a fraudulent order. Again, billing doesn't match shipping, and this order was done before they had turned that option on. But regardless, even if it did match, we still would have identified this as a fraud. Why? Because of all of these factors above, and because we see it's a proxy, we see it's a VPN, meaning they're trying to hide themselves not just behind what we call a proxy, which is that hop and a skip, but also through a VPN, which again is another way of hiding your IP address, right? A virtual private network. But people use VPNs. We use VPNs at coreGUARD because it's sometimes legitimately needed. A lot of corporate networks, they use virtual private networks because it takes that traffic off of the main internet and puts all your traffic within this virtual private network. So it's not a sure tell sign that this is a fraudulent transaction, but we immediately see there's bot activity detected on that IP address. There's recent abuse detected. The abuse velocity is high. So all of that information leads us to an extremely high score. And you can look at the order, even though it's not a high-priced item, you immediately can sound the alarm and say, no, this is fraudulent. You know what? I'll call the customer. I'll ask them for a driver's license. Or I'm looking at this and it looks like fraud to me. I'm not going to waste my time. Right? I'll just cancel the order. Now, for those of you customers on the line, one of the most important things to avoid chargebacks is and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, and Aaron, what we can do, or Joel, I think we should maybe send out an email to customers that goes over the items that I mentioned that can be changed without coreGUARD, right? And one of them, probably at the top, I should have mentioned that what is important to turn on is the auth capture capability that we offer within CoreForce. And what does that mean? It means that I'm not actually charging the credit card, I'm just authorizing it. Now, unfortunately, if you're using authorize.net, we don't support that on authorize.net. We don't use their latest API. If you're using CoreClear, if you're using Blue Dog, Transnational, USA ePay, CyberSource, I can go through the list. It's supported on all of those platforms. And what that means is when an order comes through, I'm not actually charging the credit card. I'm authorizing it. No different than when you go to a hotel They authorize your card, car rental, same thing. They don't capture the funds. So the capturing of the funds happens when actually you go to create your shipment. You can there's just a button that will show and say, yep, capture the funds. The fact that we identify something as fraudulent doesn't really help you if you're capturing the funds, because that's going to cause a chargeback unless you make sure to void the transaction the same day. You can always void a transaction the same day, and it does not count as a chargeback. Well, it can't be, meaning, let me explain that a little further. It just means that when you void a transaction, it's gone. So a customer can't claim a chargeback because it never will appear on their statement, right? But the void has to happen within that same day. So your best bet is to, and this is regardless of coreGUARD, right? Your best bet is to make sure that you are authorizing and then capturing your payment after the fact. So basically, this is coreGUARD. I mean, this is what the data that you get, and this is the information. Of course, again, that score is right on the front screen of that order. So here's a good order, right? And it has a fraud score of 8. So I feel pretty good about this. I can dig into it further, and you'll immediately see that I have a match on email and name between the email and the name and the physical address. I've got a valid billing address. Everything looks clean, no proxy, no VPN, no Tor. Tor is yet another potential Tor activity. I think Tor is short for torrent. It's what a lot of hackers use to download illegal music and movies and all of this. I'm not big into the dark web, but I should mention that this fraud tool, coreGUARD, actually looks through not just the regular web, but also the dark web to try to find any nefarious activity. To add all of that database of information that I mentioned earlier that we leverage is building its data not just from your main internet, but also from the dark web. And the dark web, for those of you who don't know, it's a real thing. It's basically where a lot of criminal activity takes place because it can go undetected, right? That's where people sell credit card numbers and drugs and all kinds of other things, right? So there is, in fact, a dark web. It's not sorcery. It's not conspiracy. It's a real thing. And if on a personal level, if you use LifeLock or IdentityGuard or any of those, a lot of those these days actually look through the dark web as well, just to see if your information is in the dark web. So basically, this is a clean report. It's a clean bill of health. It tells me, yep, I feel safe, I feel secure. Let me capture the funds and let me ship the order out. Again, capturing the funds, you want to pre-auth and auth. I would do that tomorrow, literally. I would turn that on immediately because that's a massive protection for you against chargebacks, right? Saves a lot of headaches. And at the end of the day, I always say time is money, right? Your time is money. So coreGUARD is very easy to set up, very easy to configure. There are a couple of configuration options that coreGUARD offers, and we can set those for you. They're in the system preferences, but the 3 main ones is what we call the fraud strictness level, right? And that just says how strict should coreGUARD be in scoring. It's a default of 0, which is the least strict, right? But it can be bumped up, meaning if it's bumped up, we're going to basically score more orders at a higher fraud probability. And I should have mentioned that the fraud scoring is basically, we have this little diagram here that shows you, okay, anything above 85, I better start looking at more closely. 75 is suspicious. Anything less than 40 is low risk, right? So very easy to use the system, very easy to manipulate it. But if you're not going to take the time to study this and take literally the 2 minutes to look at the order, I would suggest you don't sign up with coreGUARD. This isn't a magical pill. You need to manage it. You need to learn more and more about it so it helps you manage your business better. And it will save you time. I can promise you that. So the first setting is that fraud strictness level. You can also set the e-commerce score threshold. So by default, I mentioned earlier, if basically someone is visiting the site and we see an extremely high score, high fraudulent score, we're going to prevent them from even entering that order. Now, this can be maddening, right? If we identify someone erroneously, right? So our default on that setting is 90, but if you push it to 100, we'll never prevent that transaction. So that transaction, even if it's fraudulent, will come through, but you'll still see it on the back end. So in other words, if you never want to prevent someone from entering an order on your system, you can do that. Because obviously you don't want customers calling saying, hey, I was trying to put an order in and I couldn't. Why am I having trouble? Well, we identified you as a fraud. That's not a happy customer experience. But at the same time, if you're experiencing a lot of fraud, you probably want to take a little extra caution, right? And we can put a message, right? We can put a message at the checkout. Hey, give us a call. We apologize, but, give us a call. And then we've got the same concept. We've got a blacklist fraud score, right? So basically, again, our default is pretty high, meaning we won't blacklist someone unless they're a 95 score or higher. But 100, if you want us to set it at 100, it just means we'll never block them. We'll never blacklist them. Instead, you can just let us know and we'll blacklist them for you. Right now, we maintain those blacklists and whitelists for you as a customer, especially if you're not on a dedicated server. And that's one of the main reasons is if you're on a shared server, we're only able to maintain a single blacklist. So we don't want customers, just throwing in IP addresses of someone that they shouldn't be throwing onto a blacklist, or vice versa, throwing someone onto a whitelist that shouldn't be on that whitelist. So with the device fingerprinting, we'll get a lot more accurate, right? Because I explained that this IP address, it's not an exact science. And that's why that device fingerprinting is so important. And we're literally working to get that done pretty quickly. We decided to launch coreGUARD without it because people were literally getting slammed with fraud lately. So we have been working on this for a long time, and it was important for us to put this in as quickly as possible because, again, it's a good tool. It's a great tool. If this saves you 1 or 2 chargebacks a month, it pays for itself. Let me now just go over just the pricing real quick, and then we can answer any questions and basically finish the webinar. All right. So the first question, those of you who know me know that I'm pretty direct, right? So let me answer directly. Why isn't this included with our service? It's really simple. In order for us to access this massive database engine that's constantly improving, and it's the same engine, as I mentioned, that the credit card companies are hitting. It's the same engine that fraud services, literally, there's companies dedicated to fraud service, right? That's all they do, is they provide you a service, right, to prevent fraud, and you're paying a premium, right? Well, we have to pay for that. It's very simple. I can't give this out for free. We give so much to you for what you pay us, and we will continue doing that. If it's something that we program and we write, a lot of times we're throwing those features in there, right? But I have a hard cost on this, and my cost goes up the more transactions, right? So our pricing is pretty simple. It's based on tiers, based on revenue. We didn't want to do it based on transaction numbers. We decided to do it based on monthly revenue. So it starts at $199 a month. We may do a lower one, but we don't really have a lot of customers that do under 100. So at this point, that's the starting point, and it goes up from there. Again, if this helps you save 1 chargeback, 2 chargebacks a month, 4 chargebacks a month, it more than pays for itself if you take into account your time and the headaches that you're going through currently. So we're really excited about this. The service so far has proven itself to be worthy. It has identified quite a few orders that on the surface never would have looked to be fraudulent. And it's a service that's going to keep getting perfected. And the more of you that sign up, the more data we have, right, within our community, right? We're reaching out to other communities, right? This database engine is again, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of transactions, but it becomes smarter because it knows basically our set of customers. So it gets better with time. So if you're interested, just contact us at sales or just put in the help desk ticket. I think most of you on the call today are existing customers.
Or just text me.
Or just text Aaron. Yeah, you can always text Aaron. And just as a last little tidbit, which has nothing to do with coreGUARD, I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'm going to show you. If you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into the Chime chat, and I'm going to share my screen one more time, and this will be my CoreForce tip of the webinar. So we'll see, because I have a bunch of our staff is on this call, and some of you may know this, some of you may not, but within CoreForce, right on the menu, if you move your mouse, you have to be really exact. If you move it to this gray line, you suddenly get this arrow here when you hover over it, and you can collapse your menu. That's the tidbit of the day. Now, to get it back, you got to go right to that corner, and you can get it right back. All right, everyone. Aaron, did I do such a fantastic job that nobody has any questions?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, I didn't see anyone write into the chat during the entire webinar. If anyone has any questions right now, feel free to unmute or just simply write your question in the chat. If not, thank you everybody who came and joined the webinar today. Like I said, you can just reach out to me directly or just put in a ticket on help.coreGUARD.com if you want to learn more, or if you haven't gotten the new coreGUARD activated yet on your website, just let us know. We can get that turned on for you. Thank you everyone for attending. And so
hey, Aaron, let me point out it's 2 o'clock exactly, so I did good. I mean, I know I said I'd be shorter.
You did great. Timing was great.
Timing was perfect. So since it's the week before Christmas, I also want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah if you're celebrating Hanukkah. And if we don't talk to you, Happy New Year. We've got a lot of good stuff coming, so be on the lookout. And thank you again for attending.
Thank you, everybody.